Today I'm introducing a whole new character. This is Hole in the Woods, Chapter 27, Jacob. Later that evening, outside of Derby, on a dirt-paved country road, Jacob Zachary was sitting on his front porch of his weathered country cottage, drinking canned beer when Silas's black Ford 150 pulled up. Being an old, frail, half-crippled Vietnam veteran, Jacob felt no compulsion to stand and greet the twins as they got out. He waited until they met him on his front porch, and he offered them a seat. "How you holdin' up, Uncle Jacob?" Solomon said. "Good days, bad days." Jacob squinted his eyes from behind his thick glasses, and their forms came into focus. "How's today?" asked Solomon. "Somewhere in between. Leg's bothering me," he said. "Maybe you need a little something to relax it," said Silas. Behind them, the screen door, half off its hinges, creaked open, and Jenny Zachary, Jacob's wife, stood there with a sour, wrinkled look. She was their aunt by second marriage. "Boys, haven't seen you for a while," she said, drying a ceramic bowl with a tattered dish towel. "Hi, Aunt Jen," said Solomon. "You two doing okay? You drive all the way out here for something specific?" asked Jenny, with a wry eye scanning them up and down. Solomon looked to Silas. Silas shook his head. "Just wanted to catch up," said Silas. "You in trouble?" Jenny pressed. No, Aunt Jen, we ain't in no trouble. Can't two nephews come and visit their aunt and uncle?" "How late you stayin'?" She didn't pull her focus off them for a second. "It don't matter. Stay as long as you want," said Jacob. "Jenny, just let him alone and grab 2 more beers, will you, hon? Grab 'em yourself, boys. I ain't no one's slave around here." She stepped back inside, letting the screen door slap the frame. "Well, you heard her. Go on, help yourselves," said Jacob. "Nah, it's okay," said Silas, reaching into his shirt pocket for a large joint. He lit the butt and took a long drag to feed it and passed it to his uncle. "Been a while since I did this," Jacob said. "It's medicinal quality. Takes the pains out of those old limbs," Silas said. Jacob drew in a long sip of the sweet plant. Solomon went next. They lay silent, passing the blunt back and forth. There was no one to spot them down Jacob's long driveway, out of view from any roads or neighbors. Then he remembered. It didn't matter now. The state had legalized the drug last year. The spring evening capped a slight chill as a breeze blew across the pond and caused Jacob to shiver. He had less flesh on his bones now, and his diabetes always interfered with the way his body regulated temperature. "So how's your ma doing these days?" said Jacob. "She's okay, misses the old man," said Solomon about their deceased father. Jacob nodded, his leg feeling the first relief it had in over a month. "Where'd you say you got this stuff?" "Didn't," said Silas. "Is it working?" "Like a lube on a tire chain," said Jacob. "We can bring you more," said Solomon. "Maybe it's not a bad idea," said Jacob. "You will not," Aunt Jen hollered out the door. "If you want to be part of the conversation, we can pull up a chair." Jacob smiled at the shadowed figure behind the screen. "You're stinking up my house with that skunk smoke," she said. "Shut the door then," Jacob called out. "You boys don't stay too long now," Jenny added. Her clunky footsteps made their way to the back of the house before Jacob spoke again. "What else is new? You boys working?" "We're good. We got work here and there," said Solomon. "How are the kids, Si?" "I got one in college and one ready to go to college, if you can believe that," said Silas. "Must be his mother's genes," Jacob said with a chuckle. "Got that right. I told him I wouldn't pay a dime for that waste of an education when he could get a good job and start earning his keep." "My daughter's in high school. Don't see too much of her, though. She's just busy, into everything. Drama, Spanish club, sports, shit like that." "Keeps her off the streets, huh?" said Jacob. "You ever see your son, Solomon?" "When Wendy's in a good mood," said Solomon, "which ain't often." "How old's he now?" asked Jacob. 11, I think. Maybe gonna be. I don't know. She reminds me when it's his birthday," said Solomon. Jacob was not surprised by this. His nephews did not fall far from the apple tree. His sister had married beneath her and spawned 3 children with their father's Maleficent genes. Over the years, he tried to help them in whatever ways he was able. He didn't have much, but when they needed something, they could always come to Uncle Jacob. Jacob wondered what they needed tonight and why they needed to get him stoned to ask for it. 3 decades of drug use had built up his tolerance. This must be some fine weed. His body and mind were pleasantly relaxed, and his thoughts swirled around until they landed on something he had heard when he was getting groceries in town a few weeks ago. Before he could stop his honey tongue from oozing out the words, he said, "You boys hear about that detective they brought up from Detroit to help find the guy who killed Nina Laramie?" Jacob saw Solomon shoot a stiff glance at Silas. "No, I don't think we heard anything about that," said Silas, refusing to return his twin's look. "It's a girl detective, I heard," said Jacob. "Yeah, I heard about it. Some woman thinks she's hot shit," said Solomon, rubbing his hands along the top of his thighs as Silas now launched a glare at him. "You think they'll find the guy?" said Jacob. "It's been a long time ago," said Silas. Solomon answered under his brother's guided eye. "I don't think they got anything on the ones that did it." "The ones?" said Jacob. "The guy," said Solomon. "Was that detective bothering you for something?" said Silas. "No." Jacob realized it was a mistake to bring it up. "Did she come around here?" asked Solomon. "Now why would she do that?" interrupted Silas. With his 6th drag on the sweet bud, Jacob could feel the stone being rolled away from the tomb of his ancient memories. "Maybe 'cause you was with that girl the night she was killed." The words stopped like a boulder at the twins' feet. "We were never bothered about all that," said Silas. "Why are you bringing this up?" said Solomon. "No reason." "Must have been a reason or you wouldn't have brought it up," said Silas. "I just remember you talking about that girl. I know one of you boys liked her." "You do any fishing yet since that pond thawed?" said Silas, changing the subject. "We barely knew her," said Solomon. "You said you thought she was pretty," said Jacob, remembering the 2 of them sitting around his kitchen table as young lads, drunk and high. "We didn't say that," said Silas. "You did, right here in my kitchen." He was in the thick of it now, and the words flowed from thoughts he hadn't seen in 30 years. "I think you remember wrong," said Silas, his voice taking an edge. "When did we say that?" said Solomon. "It was right after those cops found her body. You came over to do some hunting on my property, and afterwards you sat in my kitchen half the night drinking, and you was acting all nervous, and I asked you, were you high or something? And you said, Silas, you said you didn't want to talk none about it." "You got us mixed up with someone else," said Silas. "Or maybe it was the weed." "I know my memory ain't perfect, but it was you 2. I came into the kitchen and I asked y'all if there's anything you needed to unload, and you said, Solomon, you said, 'I think we're in the clear. They don't got nothing on us.'" "Because we weren't involved," said Silas. "Yeah, I remember being here, but you were in the other room watching TV," said Solomon, oblivious to the daggered look propelled his way. "The more you drank, the louder you got," said Jacob. Solomon's voice rose. "What's your point here? We just came over to smoke a joint with you. Why you razzing us?" I've always been bothered by something you said that night, and now with all this coming back around..." Jacob's voice drifted, and he pursed his lips tight. "What is it? What did we do that night?" Silas leaned forward and bore a dark look into his uncle's eyes that frightened Jacob. "You were stoned, old man. You don't remember shit." Jacob glanced out over his greening property. The 2-track driveway was slick with mud from the thawing ground. He hadn't had his old clunker running for a week, and the sphere of oil under the engine was widening. Jacob knew he wasn't quick or agile. His nephews were big and strong and young. And it was never far from his mind that Silas had been arrested and served 6-year sentence for rape. It wasn't worth the fight, he thought, and smiled at his nephews. "Perhaps you're right," said Jacob. "The doctor at the Veterans Clinic tells me I got a 30% memory loss." And the disability checks to prove it, said Jenny from behind the screen. It's getting late, boys. Make sure you get home safely now. Jacob was grateful for her eavesdropping at that moment. Aunt Jenny's right. I gotta be getting inside now. Jenny stepped out onto the porch next to her husband, and the boys took their cue to say goodnight. They slapped old Jacob on the shoulder, and Silas bent over him and whispered in his good ear, "You keep to yourself now, old man." They took off down the stoop, and Jacob watched them get into their truck and pull out. His eyes never left their trail until the red and white taillights from their Ford went out of view. Taking a seat next to her husband of 41 years, on the wooden rocker love seat, Jenny's short legs didn't touch the porch floor as Jacob gently rocked them. Coral sky faded into dark forest green. Jacob turned to Jenny. "I know what I heard. Silas said she should have given us what we wanted, and we wouldn't have hit her so hard." "You remember it correctly," Jenny said, pointing to the first twinkle in the dark sky above them. "And you took it to Detective Poland, but he wouldn't believe you, because you had alcohol in your breath." Jacob nodded. What difference would it have made? The cops had already cleared them at that point. "There's no physical evidence to connect them to that girl's death," said Jenny. "Let's leave it alone." "It bothers me, Jenny. All these years. No amount of pot can scrub that conversation from my memory." "You want to go stirring things up in this family?" asked Jenny. Jacob gave his answer as he reached for her chapped hand and squeezed. He didn't mean to stir anything up. It's just that their Heidi had been ripped from them by a drunk driver when she was 19, and he understood a piece of Jim Laramie's suffering. "Nothing you say can or will bring that girl back," said Jenny, placing her other hand atop Jacob's as she rested her thin, white-haired head on his shoulder. Jacob didn't know if she was talking about Nina or Heidi. This is the last chapter that I'm going to read on my channel because, of course, I don't want to spoil it. Hopefully I've reeled you in and you are super interested, and the book will be published soon. Stay in touch through all my social media, my newsletter, my website, jenniferdornbush.com. You can find all the links there to sign up for my newsletter, and stay in touch on Facebook and Twitter so that you can learn when the book is coming out, but it will be soon. So I wanted to kind of give you this really deep introduction to the book, hopefully reel you in and get you interested in this story and in this case. And I want to just leave you with this last thought about what is this book really about. And I know everybody's going to sort of form their own opinions, which is, you know, the beauty of fiction and interpreting fiction and bringing our own selves into the world of fiction. But for me, what this story is really about, a couple things. So, of course, for Nina and for Jim, it's a story about justice. But for Riley St. James, this is a story about belonging. Because Riley hasn't really had that belonging. She's been deeply wounded by the thing that happened in her past. She needs to be able to let go of this very deep, dark thing in her life so that she can have that real connection and that real belonging with people. Isn't that something we all want? We all want to belong in a very meaningful and purposeful way. I love what St. Mother Teresa says. She says, "Loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the worst, the most terrible poverty of all. If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten how to belong to each other." I love framing stories that offer belonging and hope and redemption and light in the midst of really harrowing circumstances. Maybe because it's one way I can sort of make sense of the death that I was always around when I was growing up. I'm really highly energized by getting to know people's stories and finding the light and redemption and resilience that's possible for all of us. It's possible for Riley, and you're going to see as you go through the story and to the end how she gets there, how she gets to that point of resilience, and how she's starting to come out of that darkness and grab onto that light and that hope, which gives her the ability to connect a lot more deeply to people, especially to Kevin. Suffering affects all of us. It tears at the fabric of our souls. It tears at the fabric of our homes, our communities. especially that kind of suffering that's brought on us by evil that's really no fault of our own. The point of this story is that, and the point of what I love to bring about in stories, that we can't do this alone. We are not alone, and we can't do this alone. And when we connect and contribute to one another, when we start to belong to one another, as Mother Teresa says, that belonging to one another, that's the greatest power over loneliness and suffering. Doesn't matter what we've suffered, how horrible, how awful, when we can connect with others, when we can bring that suffering to another person or a group of people, that is the thread that starts to bind us in great joy and light and hope, and then eventually celebration. So I will leave it there. Thank you for journeying with me. I think you're going to love the rest of the book, Hole in the Woods. It'll be out on the shelves soon. Thanks so much.